Hello and welcome to this first look exploring session looking at Time Triumphant, an account of James's royal entry into London for his coronation. This is by Gilbert Dugdale. Now, we have previously looked at Thomas Dekker's account of the pageants, what he wrote. We have looked at the pageants, what Ben Jonson wrote. And so this is more of an account. And of course, all of these interpretations may not quite match. So there's always an interesting question as to any overlaps or differences. This is quite a difficult text to read. It's a big block of words, quite badly punctuated. So we are going to do our best and hope that everything goes well. In the room, we have Eric, we have Greg, we have Desna, we have Liza, we have Tom, and we have Professor Tracey Hill, who is our resident city chronologer to help guide us through the process. So if you wish, you can go back to our previous videos looking at Thomas Dekker's and Ben Jonson's accounts of their work, if that helps guide you through. And as we go forward, at some point we will try to mesh all of these things together into some exciting work that will explicate the whole event within reasonable bounds of question mark as to what is true and what is not true. That's always one of those problems with this. So I'm going to ask Tom if you can start us off with the opening bump, the Time Triumphant, and the dedicatory poem to the triumph. If I could ask you to read those to start us off.
The Time Triumphant, declaring in brief the arrival of our sovereign liege lord, King James, into England, his coronation at Westminster, together with his late royal progress from the Tower of London through the city to his Highness's manor of Whitehall, showing also the varieties and rarities of that sundry trophies of pageants erected as well as by the worthy citizens of the honourable city of London, as also by certain of other nations, namely Italians, Dutch, French, and the French, with a rehearsal of the King and Queen's late coming to the Exchange of London, by Gilbert Dugdale. In London, printed by R&B 1604. A dedicatory poem to the triumph of our most dread and sovereign Lord, King James. Honour attend thy gracious majesty. Bliss be her partner in thy sovereignty. Through the days are not yet young, old joys will haste, when fearful times and dateless dead and gone, thy governing hand, that never yet knew other, than a ruler's equal sucked from thy fair mother, whose careful thoughts in thee by God's command hast from thy childhood held happily hand, by which fair hand God's grace hath led thee hither, to plant thy peace, plenty, and grace together, so as our triumphs glorious be in show, so triumph-like joy may quiet go, that both in one and one both ways may be a double joy with solemnity. So triumph sings this song of joy and mirth, King James, live happily, happiest on the earth, that God all-seeing may so bless thy land, that seeing all may all thy evils withstand. Death superneth, life starteth, by Liza, life returneth, death departeth, by King James.
We'll very briefly pause there. So yes, we basically get some throat clearing and saying how great James is. It's And we have a mention of the pageant route from the Tower of London through the city, heading off to Whitehall, and that we get a mention of all these the various trophies pageants set up by the citizens of the Honourable City of London, but also of certain other nations, namely Italians, Dutch, and French. Did we get much an account of the Italian, Dutch, and French from Dekker or Jonson? Have we had any reference really to those?
Yeah, the Dutch Arch was the one at Cornhill, on the bottom of Cornhill, and the Italian Arch was the one at Gracious Street. French, I don't know, not specifically, unless it's just getting a bit confused with Belgian/Dutch/French. He does get very confused, Dugdale, actually, about a lot of things.
Forewarned. Yes, we shall see where that goes. But though our days are yet young, let us dive into the text in more detail. So, Liza, if I could start you in the big chunk, and I'll pass it over to Desna at some point.
The time triumphant in King James his happy coming to the crown of England. That time it pleased God omnipotent to seize upon the soul of our late sovereign queen of famous memory. That worthy gentleman, Sir Robert Carey, night and day omitting no industry, brought, as I have heard it credibly reported, the first fame that happened to honor our thrice famous and heroic King James, whose haste, though it unhappily threw him from his horse near his journey's end, yet it foretold the ensuing majesty to come, and worthily entertained of one so gracious as our blessed and dread sovereign, gave him to understand the power of the Almighty in his behalf, seating him as lawful and immediate in the English throne, to rule Israel with a happy hand. I shall not need to relate the good orders of the most honorable, grave, wise council of this land, the great love of the whole nobility, the effective humors of all the court, to fly to their duties in that behalf. The worthy usage of the citizens of London in general, and in what excellent manner he was proclaimed, with what quiet love a government. For mine own part, I have known the city of London many years, but I never did see the retainers, the inhabitants, both young and old, of that excellent order and government. Nothing of that giddy rashness as in times before they were accustomed to be, but all in one, and one in all, most worthily received the imperial name of King James, and freely consented to his titles, as by the grace of God, of England, Scotland, France, and Ireland, king, defender of the faith, etc. The day then generally known of his coming forward to the possession of the regal seat, let me tell you, by the way, the joy was not so great in England by the English to fetch him, as the sorrow was in Scotland of the Scots to leave him. And that was more confounding to their joys than the rest, the parting betwixt his queen and him in the open street, in the full eye of all his subjects, who spent tears in abundance to behold it. Here English and Scottish in one sympathy, joined first in hearty affected love, in sign whereof the floods of their eyes drawn from their kind hearts conjoined their amity, and no doubt they that in kindness being possessed with one joy can weep together, they will now and at all times live and die together.
And we'll pass over to Desna. You can tell there's a sort of breathlessness to this, and it's not just in the punctuation. There's a sort of breathlessness to the prose style. Anyway, to the matter.
But to make haste to the principle whereof this is part, towards England he comes. His royal entertainment in barrack I need not set down, both of the train of England and soldiers there. Yet I will tell you of a wise answer of the king to a question propounded. When he entered in the town, it rained small drops, whereby some things had hindrance which should have royalized the time. But his grace graciously being attended in his chamber, on the sudden, looking from his window, might see the sunshine. One by of no small account began to question thus. I mused why the temperate season was so quickly overcast by a shower of rain, and now that rain so overthrown by this sunshine, it presages somewhat sure. The king smiling, no great matter, quoth he, only this imagine. The first show of weather, my prosperous setting forwards by God's sufferance. The latter shower, the universal tears of my country to leave their king, and this sudden sunshine, the joy of England for my approach, which undoubtedly it was so, as it appeared, for the cost, pains, and love of his subjects was such all the way from Barrack to York. from thence to Stamford, and from thence to Theobald's, and so to the Charterhouse in London, where he remained for certain days, and then he went to the Tower of London, and so seating his most royal person here, as the like hath seldom been, or I think ever will be again, to the world's end, to any man's imagination.
And having tried to get to the point, he went off on one on something completely different. Greg, maybe you will get to the point.
Sorry,
lovely-
Rob. Could you just remind me where we are?
Well,
Sorry.
here he is happily planted, top of a column.
I've lost it completely now. It's one of those days. Sorry. No, I've lost it. Get somebody else. Oh, hey, well, here he is, happily planted and
Yes.
heavenly welcome. Heartily welcome. Oh dear. What once then, but his blessed coronation, of which was no small triumph. For had you seen him in progress to it, as many did, when he took barge at Whitehall on St. James's Day, such was his salutations to the people and theirs to him. But anon comes forth England's triumph, the worth of women, Anne of Queen of England, and happy wife to our most gracious king, whose father was a king, her brother no less, he a king, and whose husband soever kings in one, accompanied with lovely ladies, the only wed stars of the world, for beauty and good graces, following her dear husband to coronation, with her seemly hair down, trailing on her princely bearing shoulders, on which was a crownlet of gold, so she so mildly salutes her subjects, that the women weeping ripe cried all in one voice, God bless the royal queen! Welcome to England, long to live and continue so. To Westminster they went, and took on them the royalty of the time, the complete order of coronation, and by general and free consent enjoyed the rights of royalty, and were invested in their honour, possessed of majesty, owners of royalty, and made the only commander of all principality. The triumph of that time I admit. But let me turn to London, whose hearts were wildfire and burned unquenchable in love to this royal couple, and expressing her desires and their heads together to solemnize in triumph that happy day which hour of glory was dashed by the omnipotency of God's power, who mortally visiting the city and land with a general visitation, have since that time taken thousands to his mercy, and then laid their heads low that else in these actions would have held them high. Yet see again a new love of his majesty, he nobly regarding the cost together with their loves and their expectations should go current, appoints when the full possession of their joy should be, that was when the angry hand of God had worked the will of his all-commanding power, when the infection ceased, and should the triumph of the day be solemnized to this consent. Cost prepared, and the city with strangers, merchants, and others erected trophies of glory, pageants of that magnificence, the like was never well the time appointed when his majesty would set forward, should be in the holy time in Lent. The joyful springtime, when the ground in triumph of the time should likewise flourish in ample equipage, and she no niggard of her pomp attires, hers in a green livery, embroidered with flowers of 1,000 colours, divers and sundry. Thus heaven and earth applauds the triumph of King James, and mortals all agree to make that hour famous.
And Eric, in the
Thank you.
meantime, we will actually get to some details on the triumph. There has been a plague, bit awkward. He has to try and somehow spin that to make it seem that wasn't a terrible thing for the king. I mean, it's really interesting, some of the spin he's doing about how people these things work. Anyway, Eric, in the meantime,
His Grace together, is that the bit? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. In the meantime, His Grace, together with his queen and children, progressed in the country and dealt honors as freely to our nation as their hearts would wish, as creating knights of gentlemen, lords of knights, and earls of lords, and no doubt hereafter dukes of earls. Aye, and raised up in honor to England, that to this day have been long in oblivion, which as now it is honorably living, so it will never die. I mean, our noble knights of the Bath, young and gallant, worthy and valiant, nay, see the beauty of all our kind sovereign, not only to the indifferent grace, the indifferent of worth, yes, and the worthy of honor did he freely deal about these causes, but to the mean gave grace, as taking to him the late Lord Chamberlain's servants, now the king's actors. The queen, taking to her the Earl of Worcester's servants that are now her actors. The prince, her son Henry, Prince of Wales, full of hope, took to him the Earl of Nottingham, his servants, who are now his actors. So they will have actors. So that of Lord's servants, they are now the servants of the king, queen, and prince.
And there we will pause after so much stuff. That last bit is a nice bit where we really do connect with our theatre history. Of course, Lord Chamberlain's men become the King's men, and so the King, the Queen, and their son all effectively take over the theatre companies of the patronage. They don't take them over; they don't have any interest in the day-to-day affairs. Well, maybe a little bit. Yes. So this is where sometimes following companies gets a bit confusing, because when their patrons shift, the acting company may remain exactly the same, but they've got a different name, and the names can be awfully similar to some other names slightly later in the period, or slightly. It gets very wibbly wobbly and confusing. But we're just going to pause there because we haven't actually got to the royal entry, but we've got lots of really nice stuff. Lots of awkward details that I quite like. The detail of the falling off the horse, the whole thing about, oh, the Scots are so sad to see him go, the English are so happy to see him come, and there's part of me going, yeah, up to a point, Lord Copper. Yes, it's dancing around and doing a lot, and I think there is an element that the breathlessness of the punctuation does actually give it as quite a nice flow that I quite enjoyed, actually, even if we're all sort of desperate to find somewhere to breathe. I quite liked that. Thoughts in the room on that. He becomes king, comes down hoping to have a lovely time. Plague happens, everything gets delayed, etc. Thoughts in the room, Tom?
Just gladdened by the fact that it's all spin. It's just pretentious. It's just like the message that we keep on getting from the Conservative government at the moment. Just stay on message, because that's the important thing for the powers that be, and to deviate from that would be. But in saying that, it can get a bit wordy and superfluous. But I like the fact that he just has to keep on inflating and inflating and inflating.
I sort of think the feeling I get from this text is, it's not even that he's towing the party line, that he is genuinely enthusiastic as well, and he wants to be this positive about James at a time when, for many people, James is a positive thing. They haven't necessarily really met him yet, and there's still time for him to start disappointing people, which he will start doing any time soon. Certain groups obviously will be very disappointed, and that will lead to some unfortunate gunpowder-based incidents. But he can he's equally opportunistic in his disappointments. It has to be said. Any other thoughts? Because to say, none of this is essential to our mission, but it's good stuff. Eric.
I do like how he mentions, because this is hard to parse when you're reading it, but I mean, he mentions like, oh yeah, there were knights, or knights of gentlemen were made knights, knights were made lords were made earls, and so on and so forth. And it's like, so basically he upgraded them so he can get more taxes, but we're not mentioning that. I don't know. It just like it reads like he's sucking up to him, but doesn't quite know how to do it in a concise manner.
Well, I say, as a piece of print, it's not an excessively long one. We will see considerably longer pamphlets on this sort of level. Liza.
Yeah, I mean, this guy is clearly gifted at spin, and he knows, he knows what he needs to put out, which is welcome, joy, unity. He really presses unity between England and Scotland, which we know is a major project of James's. that they will, what is it, that they who wept together will now surely live and die together, referring to the English and the Scots. And it's really interesting as well to pick out the bits of history, as you highlighted the bit of theater history where they each adopt a theater company, but earlier than that, Robert Carey's ride to bring the news of Elizabeth's death to Queen James. King.
Queen James, sorry.
Happy Pride Month, everybody! Anyways, so to bring the news of Elizabeth's death to James, not yet king, but King of Scotland, James VI, and Carey, yeah, he rode really hard. He rode for many hours without a break. And yeah, he fell off his horse, because that's what happens when you ride your horse and you're not fully awake or coordinated. But he was the one who brought the news first, and he hoped to be rewarded, and he was.
Yes, I mean, this is a good example of the nature of these texts. You know, very little of this text is necessarily untrue, but it's so exaggerated and spun. You know, I don't believe for a second that the English were weeping for joy and the Scots were weeping for sad. You know, I don't think people necessarily cared in the same. They were worried certainly about the transition of power, and that you know, if that it all looks like it's going okay, and I think there was a lot of relief for James, but I don't know how many tears of joy were, and I certainly don't believe that the heavens opened in the way he spins the rain of going, the rain's a good thing, because you know it's the tears of joy coming down from the sky, and I'm going, yeah, good job that man.
And it's not about scattering titles around everywhere he went. Of course, it's only about a year before this starts becoming intensely controversial. You know, Mistletoe is literally 1605. So, you know, obviously we didn't realise that then. But I think some of that is kind of, it's the lack of familiarity with James and James's preferences. I think, you know, with Elizabeth, they kind of knew how she wanted to be represented and which buttons to push. And with James, they're a bit in the dark, really, and they're kind of guessing. I have to say, I'm very tickled by the idea of the City of London being ordinarily demonstrating giddy rashness. It's not really a concept to associate with the city very much, but yeah, his enthusiasm. I think you're right. I think there's a sort of, it's kind of headlong, isn't it? You know, and in that sort of headlong rush to say these things, he's going to say things that are impolitic or, you know, perhaps not wise, but that's part of the appeal of it, really. I think it's a really fun pamphlet.
Okay, I'll ask Liza to take up the next cudgels. I will steal the text from you at some point, and then I'll pass it over to Tom when we get to that. There's a bit of verse coming up, and there's a bit of text after that. We'll pass over to Tom at that point. But Liza, if you could return again to our Time Triumphant. If you could, I say return again. Could you start telling us about the triumphs, please?
But to return again to our Time Triumphant, now the hour is come and the day appointed, and the preparation of which is mighty. Aye, and so great as neither can my tongue tell or my pen set down. Yet to make a flourish of a flourish, thus it was. Our heretic king? Heretic can't be.
That can't be right.
It could be hereditary.
Yeah, that might be more likely. I'm going to say he's not a heretic. Let's go with that.
I don't think he's a heretic.
Yeah.
Anyway, our king, hearing of the preparation to be great, as well to note the other things as that was desirous privately at his own pleasure to visit them, and accompanied with his queen in his coach, he came to the exchange there to see for their recreation, and thinking to pass unknown, the wily multitude, perceiving something, began with such hurly-burly to run up and down with such unreverent rashness as the people of the exchange were glad to shut the stair doors to keep them out. Here they lost the pleasing sight they might have enjoyed but for their rashness. When his highness had beheld the merchants from a window all below in the walks, not thinking of his coming, whose presence else would have been more, they, like so many pictures, civilly seeming, all bare, stood silent, modesty commanding them so to do, which sight so delighted the king that he greatly commended them, saying he was never more delighted than seeing so many of diverse and sundry nations so well ordered and so civil, one with the other. But with all discord mended, the rudeness of the multitude, who regardless of time, place, or person, will be so troublesome.
And countrymen, let me tell you this. If you heard what I hear concerning that you would stake your feet to the ground at such a time ere you would run so regardless up and down, say it is Highness' pleasure to be private, as you may note by the order of his coming. Will you then be public, and proclaim that which love and duty cry silence to? This shows his love to you, but your open ignorance to him. You will say perchance it is your love. Will you in love press upon your sovereign thereby to offend him? Your sovereign, perchance, mistake your love, and punish it as an offence? But hear me, when hereafter comes by you, do as they do in Scotland, stand still, see all, and use silence. So shall you cherish his visitation, and see him thrice for once amongst you. But I fear my counsel is but water turned into the Thames. It helps not. But to our solemnity. They covet the city and country and make preparation to the day. They covet the order for the king's person in the city, his welcome to it, and his quiet pass through the streets. The country they post up as to attend, so that all are busied to his solemnity, and reason, I trow, being the day of triumph so long expected. The Tower was empty of his prisoners. And I beheld the late Walter Raleigh and the late Lord Cobham, the late Lord Grey, Markham with others, conveyed, some to the Marshalsea, others to the gatehouse, and others pointed prisoners, the Tower itself, prepared with a pomp as I never saw, such glory in the hangings, such majesty in the ornaments of the chambers, and such necessary provision as when I beheld it, I could no less than say, Tom, what does he say?
God gives King James the place and the glory of the day, as never kings possessed like place that came the northern way. And since the heavens will have it so, and living souls dare answer no.
Upon the Thames. Desna, take up what happens upon the Thames.
Upon the Thames, the waterworks for his entertainment were miraculous, and the fireworks on the water passed pleasing, as a castle or fortress builded on two barges, seeing as a settled fort in of an island, planted with much munition of defence, and two pinnaces ready rigged, armed likewise to assault the castle, that had you beheld the managing of that fight with onset on the castle, repulse from the castle, and then the taking of it in. It was a show worthy the sight of many princes, being there placed at the cost of the Cinque Ports, whereat the king, all pleased, made answer that their love was like the wild fire unquenchable, and I pray God it may ever be so. Well, from the Tower he came. Here cost was quite careless, desire that was fearless, and content flourished in abundance, but so royally attended as if the gods had summoned a parliament and were all in their steps of triumph to Jove's high court. This worthy train, ending so majestic a presence, and the companies of London in their liveries placed in street double-railed for them, and the passengers, the whifflers, they in their costly suits and chains of gold, walking up and down, not a conduit betwixt the Tower and Westminster, but runs wine, drink who will, coming thus with his royal assembly also gallantly mounted, as the eye of man was amazed at the pomp. In Fenchurch Street was erected a stately trophy or pageant at the city's charge, on which stood such a show of workmanship and glory as I never saw the like. Top and top gallant whereon were shows so embroidered and set out, as the cost was incomparable, who speaking speeches to the king of that excellent eloquence, and as while I live, I commend. The city of London very rarely and artificially made, where no church, house, nor place of note, but your eye might easily find out, is the Exchange, Coal Harbour, Paul's, Bow Church, etc.
And Greg, if you'll tell us about St. George.
Yes, if I can get some breath. There also St. George and St. Andrew in complete armour, not in one combat and fought for the victory, but an old hermit passing by in an oration, join them hand in hand, and so forever have made them as one heart, to the joy of the king, the delight of the lords, and the unspeakable comfort of the commonalty. Our gracious Queen Anne, mild and courteous, placed in a chariot of exceeding beauty, did all the way so humbly and with mildness salute her subjects, never leaving to bend her body to them this way and that women and men in my sight wept with joy. The young hopeful, Henry Frederick, or Frederick Henry, Prince of Wales, smiling as overjoyed to the people's eternal comfort, salute them with many a bend before the Lord Mayor of the city, in a crimson velvet gown, bearing his enamelled golden mace.
Maybe something like that, we weren't sure.
Yeah. Golden mace upon his shoulder, ushered the king and prince, who, bringing them to the temple bar, took his leave and received many thanks to the king and queen, who was after met by the aldermen and sheriffs, who came to guard him home. Well, the glory of that show passed, the king and his train passed on through Gracechurch Street. Would that be? Yeah, possibly. Or Gracious Street, I don't know. But there, let me tell you that I was not very near, but in my eye it was super excellent justice, as I take it, tied in beaten gold, holding a crown in a hand, guarded with charms and cornets, whose noise was such as if the triumph had been endless. There likewise were on both sides speeches spoken, shows appointed with several harmonies of drums, trumpets, and music of all sorts.
And Eric, can you take up the cudgels on the Italians, please?
Yes, okay, I must unmute first, and then. The Italians spared no spending in that behalf, at whose charge this glorious prospect was so pompous and full of show to the wonder of every beholder, both for the height, strength, and quality. Through it our king and his train passed, and at the corner of the street stood me one, an old man with a white beard, of the age of 19. Who had seen the change of 4 kings and queens, and now behold the triumphs of the 5th, which by his report exceeded the rest. Wherefore, as hopeful never to behold the like, yet he would of his own accord do that which shew his duty and old love. That was to speak of 5 lines that his son had made him, which lines were to this purpose, he himself attired in green.
And Tom, if I could ask you to attire yourself in green for these lines following. I don't know if they are actually connected with that. You're muted at present, Tom.
Peerless of honour, hear me speak a word. Thy welcome glory and enthroned renown, being in peace of earthly pomp and state, to furnish forth the beauties of thy crown. Age thus salutes thee, with a dawny pate. 19 is thy servant's years, that hath beheld thy predecessors 4, all flourishing green, whose deaths the subjects, mingled with mine, did many times deplore. But now again, since that our joys are 500ths welcome, I do give my king and my thy charge to us that be alive. Never be known a 5th extreme to bring. My honest heart be patent of the rest, who ever prayed for them before now thee. Both them and thine of all the joy be possessed, whose lively presence we all bless to see, and so passed on God's guide thee on thy way. O Hind concludes, having no more to say.
But the narrow way and the pressing multitude so overshadowed him, and the noise of the show, that opportunity was not favourable to him, so that the king passed by. Yet, noting his zeal, I have publicly imprinted it, that all his fellow subjects may see this old man's forwardness, who must of his purpose by the concourse of the people. Beside, the king appointed no such thing, but at several stays and appointed places. I let a lot go in there, because, once again, I feel that there's a lot of detail here that isn't necessarily directly cogent to the stuff we got in here. But all the stuff about the king sort of pootling about and people recognizing him, and there's a crush, and that was an interesting little incident. I'm quite interested in that. I'm really interested in the fact that they cleared all the prisoners out the tower, and there is a very unfortunate turn of phrase about the hangings.
They mean fabric hangings.
I know, but it's literally just after saying they've removed a load of prisoners, and there's such glory in the hangings. It's a very awkward turn of phrase.
If you were important enough to get imprisoned in the tower, I'm pretty sure you weren't going to be hanged. I'm pretty sure that some sort of sharp steel implement was probably going to be involved. But it's interesting that he mentions seeing Sir Walter Raleigh.
Yeah, lots of faces there mentioned in passing.
I don't know why he calls Raleigh late, because Raleigh didn't actually get executed until 1628, so he's still very much alive, even though he's been in the tower for a while.
When is this written? I know he's describing the.
So
yeah, it's bang on top. It's a very odd phrasing.
Well, perhaps he's been stripped of his knighthood.
It might be something like that, yeah, possibly. It's funny when you say it's a funny one, that, and just in his kind of attempt to demonstrate how they no stone was left unturned, if you like, to celebrate James, he just walks into this great big steaming cow patch of a thing, doesn't he? Really, it's yeah. And I think some of the stuff he's just clearly really not following what's going on. You know, he's sort of, I didn't see that quite right, and this old man, and I think at one point he talks about hermits, and the hermit is actually Aline playing the Genius of London, and he thinks he's a hermit. You know, he's clearly having a good time, but a bit fuddled perhaps by all the free wine.
Yeah, and you know, we do know from Dekker's constant asides that the king just sort of tends to move on. It's quite noisy. He's not listening to the speeches at all. So there's something a bit tragic actually about that. If this great actor who's, you know, has turned up and done this, and he's not quite on form, nobody can hear him, the king just walks by, you know, that's quite sad. Yeah, we do finally get some details about stuff. There's the waterworks for his entertainment were miraculous. That's detailed and helpful. And the fireworks and the water passing pleasing. I mean, it doesn't give any details as to what any of that means, but you know, it was a good show. It was a good show. Thanks for that, Dugdale. But we have got some details of a sort of attack on a castle. So there's a sort of feint attacks and things that looks quite nice. Detail of the whifflers, the procession, the conduits running with wine. You know, stuff that we expect for a royal entry. Liza.
We've got some nice little production details. We've got you know, the king and his train passed on through Gracious Street, but there, let me tell you, I was not very near, but in my eye, it was super excellent. And then he says, Justice, as I take it, attired in beaten gold, holding a crown in her hand, guarded with shawms and cornets. Those are musical instruments, and they're wind instruments. They make a loud, piercing noise that carries a long way. So they're very popular for use in street entertainments like this. And they say whose noise was such as if the triumph had been endless. And then they've got several harmonies of drums, of trumpets, and music of all sorts. So there's not just the one band, but there are several in the streets. The Italians like their music. A lot of Italians in Britain are musicians.
Other thoughts? Otherwise, we've only got a relatively small chunkette to do. So let's plow to the end. Liza, then I'll ask Desna to do the bit in verse. Then I'll go to Greg. Then Eric. I think that's our lot. So yes, Liza, along Cornhill we are.
Along Cornhill they trooped with great majesty. But his highness, being right over the exchange, smiled, looking towards it, belike remembering his last being there, the grace of the merchants and the rudeness of the multitude. And casting his eye up to the third trophy or pageant, admired it greatly. It was so goodly, top and top, many stories, and so high as it seemed to fall forward. On the top you might behold the sea dolphins as dropping from the clouds on the earth, or looking to behold the king. Pictures of great art, cost and glory, as a double ship, that being two, was so cunningly made, as it seemed but one, which figured Scotland and England in one, with the arms of both in one scutcheon, sailing on two seas at once. Here was a speech of wonder delivered too, but the glory of this show was in mine eye as a dream, pleasing to the affection, gorgeous and full of joy, and so full of show and variety that when I held down my head as wearied with looking so high, methought it was a grief to me to awaken so soon. But thus the Dutch and French spared for no cost to gratify our king. Still the streets stood railed, and the liveries of all the companies on both sides guarding the way, and the strong stream of people violently running in the midst towards Cheapside. There our triumphant rides garnished with troops of royalty and gallant personages. Passing by the great conduit, on the top thereof stood a prentice in a black coat, a flat cap, servant-like as walking before his master's shop. Now whether he spake this or no, I heard not it, but the manner of his speech was this, coming to me at the third or second hand.
What lack you, gentlemen? What will you buy? Silks, satins, taffeties, etc.? But stay, bold tongue, stand at a giddy gaze. Bedim mine eyes, what gallant trainer here! That strikes minds mute and puts good wits in maze. Oh, 'tis our king, royal King James the First, say. Pass on in peace and happy be thy way. Live long on earth England's great crown to sway. Thy city, gracious king, admires thy fame, and on their knees prays for thy happy state. Our women for thy Queen Anne, whose rich name is their created bliss and sprung of late. If women's wishes may prevail thus being, they wish you both long lives and good agreeing. Children for children, pray before they eat at their uprising and their lying down. Thy sons and daughters, princely all complete, royal in blood, children of high renown. But generally together they incline, praying in one, great king, for thee and thine.
Whether he were appointed, or of his own accord, and I know howsoever forward love is acceptable, and I would the king had heard them, but the sight of the trophy at Soper Lane end made him the more forward. There was cost both curious and comely, but the devices of that afar off I could not conjecture, but by report it was exceeding. It made no huge high show like the other, but as pompous both glory and matter, a stage standing by, on which were enacted strange things, after which an oration delivered of great wisdom. Both the sides of this pageant were decked gallantly and furnished as all the broad streets as the king passed shewed like a paradise. Here his grace might see the love of his subjects, who at the time are exceeding in the shows, passing by the cross beautifully gilded and adorned. There the recorder and alderman on a scaffold delivered him a gallant oration, and a cup of beaten gold, so he passed on to ye pageant at ye little conduit, very artificial indeed, of no exceeding height, but pretty and pleasing, in ye manner of an arbour, wherein were placed all manner of wood inhabitants, divers shows of admiration, as pompions, punganes, and all kind of fruit, which ye lords highly commended, where after such strange musics have given plenty of harmony, he passed towards Fleet Street through Ludgate, where the conduits dealt so plenteously both before and after he was passed, as many were shipped to the Isle of Sleep that had no leisures for snoozing to behold ye day's triumph. When he came to ye trophy in Fleet Street, ye lords considered that the same for royalty was so richly beautified and so plenteous of show that with the breadth of the street it seemed to have gone back again, and where but then at the cross in cheap but otherwise saluted, as with variety of speeches and all sundry sorts of musics by ye city appointed to that as that at ye little conduit, and all else but ye Exchange and Gracious Street. Ye top of this pageant was placed a globe of a goodly preparation. This while wondering at ye glory of it, setting on unawares that they were on ye pageant at Temple Bar, neither great nor small, but finely furnished. Some compared it to an exchange shop. It shined so in ye dark place, and was so pleasing to ye eye, where one a young man, an actor of ye city, so delivered his mind in the manner of all in oration, that 1,000 give him his due preserving commendations. In ye Strand was also another.
And Eric, take over.
Thank you.
In the Strand was also another of small motion, a pyramid, beseemly fitting time and place, but the days far spent on the king and states, I am sure, were wearied with the shows, and as the stomach may glutton, the daintiest courts stayed not long, but passed forward to the place appointed, when I leave them to God's protection and their own pleasures. Thus you have heard a short description of this day's progress, in which all the peers and lords of England and part of Scotland were assembled to beautify the triumphs of their most gracious king. The multitude of people at this present were innumerable, but to conclude, God be thanked for it. Such was the great care of the worshipful citizens of London, and all things so providently foreseen by them that little or no hurt or danger ensued to any, which was greatly feared of many to have happened. Apologies. By reason of the great multitudes that were in the city, being come both far and near thither to see this most glorious and happy show. And I beseech the Almighty God, of his infinite mercy and goodness, so keep our king, queen, and prince, and all their princely progeny, that no harm never come near them, nor touch them, but that they may ever live to his great glory, and to maintain his most glorious gospel forevermore. Amen. Finish.
Amen, indeed. We've got lots of lovely details in that. I love this. The conduits are flowing with wine, and people are starting to fall asleep. He really doesn't like the multitude very much, doesn't he? I love that bit when he sees the king looking at the exchange, and he's sort of projecting onto the king. Oh, he's remembering that incident the other day, and it's just going, no, you're not telepathic, mate. I mean, the king's just looking. He's just looking around. He's just looking, going, oh, I've been there.
Yeah, but that's, what's his face? That really sycophantic guy who always covers royal events for the BBC. He's like, oh, they're passing through this part of town, and maybe they're thinking about this thing that happened that nobody really cares about.
Yeah. But we've got lots of I've just written basically right next to that bit. But you've got lots of detail of things that we have had more detailed accounts of. But that sense of this person who's walking by and missed bits, or he saw this from a distance and it looked really good from afar. It didn't hear any of the words. This is a constant refrain that we keep having with accounts of civic and royal pageantry. If nobody's really hearing the speeches at all. And again, this strong stream of people violently running in the midst towards Cheapside. This detail of the crowds doing things, and in terms of our working on these texts and turning them into something more performative, what I really like about these first-hand accounts is sometimes they do these little details where you could be, as Liza just said, talking to a correspondent on the ground who's just making some stuff up, or is describing saying, can't really see anything. Back to the studio. It does work really quite nicely to mix in with the other stuff that we've got. I mean, I do feel that we need to have Dekker in the studio being really annoyed that the king keeps walking past doesn't linger for any of his stuff. He's just by the end just really hacks off.
I'm intrigued by the guy on near the Great Conduit who. It's really difficult to tell exactly what's going on there, but it seems that he's sort of pretending to be part of the royal entry because he might make some money out of it or something. I don't know. It's an odd one, but it does perhaps better than all the others testify to the sheer chaos. Really, the running violently towards Cheapside bit is quite well known, because normally these texts have the impression that it's all very decorous and well organised, and and the whifflers do their job brilliantly and all the rest of it. But actually, it would have been perilous, actually, in fact, for a lot of people.
Well, I mean, we know in modern times, the dangers of a crowd that isn't properly marshaled, and crushes are possible. And I like the idea that this guy just stood up and did a turn, and was considered really good. But I mean, obviously, we got this coming to me at the third or second hand. This looks slightly too well formed to be a spontaneous speech. So it's a really interesting question. I suspect the speech isn't accurate. I suspect he's just done some versifying there or something, or adapted whatever he's heard. But yeah. It gives us a sense, considering that we read two relatively dry accounts. Certainly from Ben Jonson. Ben Jonson it wasn't just dry; it was arid. Dekker's had a bit more life to the sense of the occasion, but this does actually give us a sense of the event in a way that feels like what someone on the ground would have felt. For all the sycophancy that occasionally creeps through. Thoughts in the room before I close this account? Anyone got thing to throw in? Tom?
Yeah, just to amplify that, it's the first time I've actually appreciated the unruliness of the crowd and the throng of the crowd, and because normally you just think, oh, it's a pageant, and the pageant progresses and everybody stands and claps politely and stays in place. But it's got a real sense of chaotic energy that, it's a tumult of people, never mind all the wine, but just and this account did that for me more than any other.
Lovely. Any more for any more? Okay, well that's it for the royal entry. All the big primary material. I'm sure there's more material we can dig out of this pre-coronation royal entry. But yes, this is it for the moment in this phase. I'm sure we will start mushing things together in the future to see what comes out of it, and maybe find some other first-hand material that we can play with. But all that remains, thank all the wonderful readers for all their wonderful reading. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye. Many were shipped to the Isle of Sleep.